Continuing now on the Bernard Madoff sentencing, Jacob Frenkel, a former SEC enforcement attorney, joins us now from our bureau in Washington. Jacob, thanks for being with us today. Welcome back to Bloomberg News.
Thank you, Mark. You're welcome.
150 years. Your thoughts on the sentence?
Staggering, but not unconscionable. What I really think Judge Chin wanted to do, besides send a compelling message, the deterrent message that the government was asking for, but what he also wanted to be able to do was say, everything that I could do for these victims, everything that the government asked for in terms of punishing Bernard Madoff, I, Judge Chin, am going to do, and in fact did do. And he was very careful in building that record because a sentence is appealable. We've talked many times before about the federal sentencing guidelines, and in essence, he jettisoned those guidelines because the Supreme Court has said they're entirely advisory. But what he basically said was, guidelines notwithstanding, sentencing practices notwithstanding, this is a fraud of such unprecedented magnitude, of such a long period of time, such devastation to the victims, that I'm going to set a new standard in white-collar crime sentencing.
Jacob, you know that the Securities and Exchange Commission has been in the crosshairs of the criticism following the Bernard Madoff scandal. Where did the agency fail?
Well, I think first of all, we don't really know yet. And unfortunately, the mere fact that the SEC has come under criticism for failing in the context of the Madoff matter, in and of itself, is devastating reputationally to the agency. That task has been assigned to Inspector General Kotz, and we've already seen Capitol Hill say, okay, we really wanted your report by now. We want it by the end of June. We really want to see it soon, because for the agency to be able to begin to fix what went wrong, it needs to really know what went wrong. And my biggest concern, because the Inspector General has issued some very constructive reports despite the fact that they're not received well within the agency, my hope is the agency will pay attention to his recommendations and not just perceive them as rantings of an Inspector General, because the SEC will continue to be held accountable, and the answer is not throwing money at the agency.
And Jacob, as you know, this did not happen on Mary Shapiro's watch, but now she is also somewhat in the crosshairs because going forward, the agency is going to be under even more scrutiny to try to prevent such white-collar crimes on this type of staggering level.
Well, that's always true with the changes of administration, whether political or just within agencies. And she and Rob Kazami are fully aware of the attention that that has been brought to bear and will continue to be focused on the agency. But at the end of the day, the SEC is responsible for policing the markets. That's where it was perceived, at least in the Madoff case, but in many other instances over the past few years, to have failed. And I think the real test is going to be, is Mary Shapiro, with Rob Kazami's help, going to somehow be able to begin to restore the luster of the agency, because there really are a lot of good, hard-working people, or has this institutional malaise somehow going to have a perpetuating and debilitating effect on the agency's future?
Jacob Frenkel, former SEC enforcement attorney, joining us from Washington. He's going to stay over with us through the break. Thanks. And we'll have more on today's sentencing of Bernard Madoff. And Wall Street's largest bond trading firms say the worst for Treasuries may be over. We'll have that when we come back. Let's get back to Jacob Frenkel. He's a former SEC enforcement attorney. He joins us once again from Washington. Jacob, thanks for staying with us through the break. The Bernard Madoff scandal going forward, how does it change the regulatory landscape?
I don't know that it changes the regulatory landscape. It's really what we've seen so far, particularly with the sentence today. The impact is on the deterrent message and how how white-collar prosecutions are going to be perceived. I think that one of the biggest losers today could very well be Alan Stanford, who's at a very early stage of his proceeding and now knows that rolling the dice and going to trial, where the B precedes or is part of the dollar amount of the loss, meaning billion instead of millions, that the ultimate sentence, if convicted, could be astronomical. I mean, the other component, back to your question in terms of the regulatory landscape, is we've already seen the push for hedge fund regulation on Capitol Hill, significant changes.
Right.
I think the real test is going to be whether the SEC can survive this despite the change of administration within the SEC.
Jacob, I was wondering if I might ask you your opinion on those who say that Judge Chin's sentencing today was overkill and not in keeping with white-collar sentencing.
I think the best way to look at his sentence today, because that is a credible argument that we in the defense bar would have loved to have seen Judge Chin impose a sentence along the lines of what Mr. Sorkin was requesting, 12, 15, 20 years, because that would have permitted an argument at any sentencing of white-collar crime. Well, if Bernard Madoff, for billions of dollars, 30 years of fraud, only received 15 or 20 years, how can you possibly consider a sentence of X number of years against my client? But as a practical matter, you really have to look at the Madoff case and the sentence as the true outlier on the bell curve because of its unprecedented nature, the length of time, number of victims, the effect that it had on so many lives. This really is the oddball case, the unusual case, as I said, the outlier. And I don't think it's going to really change the equation because most judges are going to stay close to the federal sentencing guidelines.
Buyer beware in the future, investor beware. What should investors now take from this? What lessons learned?
Well, that lesson has never changed. And unfortunately, even the greatest vigilance on the part of a regulator,
right.
I mean, despite the criticism that the SEC has come under, I mean, still, somebody who is committed to perpetrating a massive fraud is going
right.
to go to great lengths to protect that. It's always buyer beware.
Yeah.
And I think the real issue is diversify if you're going to play in the market.
Former SEC enforcement attorney Jacob Frenkel joining us from Washington. Jacob, good to talk to you again. Thanks.